Sooner or later, you too will own a Hasselblad. Sooner or later, nothing but a Hasselblad will satisfy your requirements. As your photographic skill improves, you will want to engage in more ambitious and interesting picture making. You will want a camera that can cope with your future photographic problems and conquer them with consummate ease. Top flight photographers the world over use Hasselblad cameras. This is because Hasselblad has more than adequate resources that you, too, can use to your benefit. You are the master of practically any visual situation with a Hasselblad, whether you use it to record the events of a memorable vacation, for taking eye-catching advertising shots, or fine art photocopying. Step by step, Hasselblad always matches and promotes your photographic process. And so, as written, I have acquired a Hasselblad. Do I really need to introduce the Hasselblad V system? You know, this is the iconic medium format film camera. So the 500 series of Hasselblad was first introduced in 1957, 2 years before the Nikon F, and over the last 67 years, it has photographed everything from fashion and cultural icons to space missions. It has even been to the moon. And Hasselblad will never let you forget that it went there, capturing some of the most legendary images in human history. So the legacy of the Hasselblad's V system really is something else. You know, few cameras have had such a profound impact, not just on photography, but how we've actually documented humanity as a whole. So of course that means I had to get one. So which little slice of that legacy have I picked up? Well, it's this beautiful 1987 Hasselblad 500 CM. It comes with the modern waist level viewfinder, an A12 Type 3 back, and the legendary 80mm f2.8 CF lens. And what a lens it is, but we'll look at that later. So why did I go with the Hasselblad V system? Well, it's not just about the incredible lenses, which are amazing, but it's the system as a whole that really got me. There's a massive ecosystem of accessories, both first party and third party, that make this camera insanely useful. Everything from film backs, viewfinders, winders, lenses, and the bodies in between holding it all together. So when it comes to film backs, Hasselblad has made them for just about everything. You've got your standard 6x6, you've got 645, you've got sheet film backs, pack film backs, and even 70mm roll backs. Some of those formats are more practical than others now, but they exist and they can have some pretty wild creative uses. You know, I've seen people modify the pack film back to shoot wet plates. Or you could take one of those sheet film holders and maybe load it with that direct positive paper from Ilford, because why not? Also, the system has a lot of really interesting bodies that you can get that are not really as well known but are very interesting. You know, they range from lots of normal bodies like the 503 series, to the flex body, which is sort of this like niche oddball view camera type body where the whole body is kind of flexible and allows you to do tilt and shift movements, which is kind of wild. So you can have Hasselblad lenses on a view camera, kind of. There are limitations, it's super weird, but the option is out there. And of course you have to mention things like the SWC, aka the super wide camera with its insane 30mm Biogon wide angle lens, which is part of this system as well. And then of course there's more modern stuff like the Nons Instax back, which lets you shoot Instax square film in a Hasselblad. And I'm also currently looking at another super cool back that I'm not ready to spoil just yet, but is really interesting and really cool. But I still have to test it, but if it turns out to be as good as I think it's going to be a really interesting experience. And then of course there's the digital potential. So one day, if film completely disappears, I could get the 50 or 100 megapixel digital back for this camera that came out from Hasselblad recently, slap it on and keep shooting with this camera. Basically, no matter what happens, film or digital, I can keep shooting with this system until the heat death of the universe. And I want to keep shooting with this body until the heat death because the Blad is just such a joy to shoot. It's a beautiful mechanical machine that just feels fantastic to operate. But the real joy with operating this camera is that absolute steak slapping shutter sound. You know, it is just a creamy, clean, chunking sound to match that clean design. Like, just look at it. Now, some people say that loading a Hasselblad is a pain in the ass, but I'm a man's man, one that is not afraid to look my enemy dead in the eye through the scope of a high-powered sniper rifle from 2 towns over, and one that does not need a manual. And its lack of manual reading totally did not result in me not unlocking this little tab part here that you need to thread the film under, and just trying to force it under there, tearing the backing paper and destroying the first few frames of a roll of Tri-X. But once I learned how, I did in fact get some film loaded into this thing so I could go shooting. People. Last shot. So let's talk about the lenses for this, because let's be honest, that's half the reason why anybody gets into a Hasselblad V system. That, and so now that I can casually drop into conversation, oh, I use Arch, by the way. On the Hasselblad V system, you get access to the Carl Zeiss glass in 6x6 medium format. And this is the kind of optics people write poetry about. The sharpness, the contrast, the bokeh. You know, it's all very serious stuff on this camera. Serious enough that you'll start saying things like micro contrast and pretending you can actually see it. But when it comes to buying lenses for a Blad, most people go for kind of a classic trio. You've got the 50mm, the 80 and the 150. It's a balanced, versatile setup, and it really is kind of the starter pack of medium format kits. And honestly, when it comes to lenses, that is what I should have done. But I didn't. So I actually have the 80mm f2.8 planner with the camera, which came with it, and it's kind of the default lens for the system. You know, it's a great lens. It's sharp, reasonably compact, fast enough, and completely uncontroversial, you know? It just works. But then I kind of jumped the gun and went straight to the 350mm f5.6 because nothing says practical medium format photography like a lens the size of your forearm. It's big, although surprisingly actually not that heavy, but it does kind of turn the camera into a bit of a small artillery unit. It's also an amazing lens. The subject isolation is actually ridiculous up close, and the background melt is really gorgeous. Even at 5.6, it's still very creamy. And it makes you feel like you're spying on your subject from across a field, which creatively opens up a lot of doors. And to round out my lens collection for now, I've got the 135mm macro with the auto bellows for a dedicated macro lens setup that can reach 1:1 easily. Now this macro lens actually has to be used on a bellows or a variable extension tube or a regular extension tube. You can't just mount it directly to the camera because it doesn't have a focusing system, but we'll talk about that in the future. Now I actually have some really interesting plans for this macro lens, but one of those plans included a trip to the botanical gardens. Now hand-holding this bellows system was actually a lot better than I thought it would be. I just sort of held the camera close to my chest and then racked the focus, very similar to using a Mamiya RB where you rack the focus back and forward with a knob. And honestly, a lot of times I would just set the focus to the right point where, you know, 1:1 or half reproduction or whatever. And then I would just move the camera physically closer back and forward until it got into focus. And that allowed me to get some really nice macro shots of some flowers and bugs in the gardens. So I didn't really go for the standard setup for this camera, and I built my lens kit based on some entirely stupid plans and my love of telephoto lenses. There is a reason why 300mm is my most used focal length on 35mm. But I am planning to either get the 40mm or the 50mm for something wide angle. And I have tried a friend's 150mm f4 lens and that was amazing, so I'll probably end up buying one of those as well at some point. Because that lens is just... Now the Hasselblad is actually not without issues, but I can't really think of any major ones right now. I haven't ran into anything too bad yet. You know, some may think that the size might be an issue, but for a 6x6 camera, SLR in particular, it is very compact, especially compared to something like the Bronica ETRS, which is about the same size but slightly shorter, and that's a 645 camera, not 6x6. So it fits just as easily into the bag as the Bronica 645. For an SLR camera that shoots 6x6 medium format, it's actually not that bad. And the only real issue, honestly, with Hasselblads is the price they now command. They have shot up in price a lot over the last few years and they've gotten kind of hideously expensive. But the lenses are fairly reasonably affordable if you know which ones to go for, and you can get some really good deals if you know where to look. Those deals are probably not on eBay, but if you look around locally, you might strike it lucky. That's why I've gone with a Hasselblad V system. You know, between the lenses, the crazy range of accessories you can get, and the sheer joy of just using a beautifully made mechanical machine, it just made sense for me. And honestly, after owning the camera for only a couple of months now, I think me and the Blad are in for the long haul. like a slow-burning, medium-format love story full of patience and the occasional awkward moment where I'm fumbling with the film back in low light. So here's to many rolls, sharp images, and a great experience that will hopefully outlast most of my other commitments, including this channel. But for that, I'll see you next time.